David Barry reporting for Jewish Online Magazine. Our special guest today is Brian Sachs. Welcome to Jewish Online Magazine, Brian.
I'm very pleased to be with you in Jewish Online Magazine. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Brian. We're here today to speak with Brian about his role as athletic correspondent for the Jewish Chronicle and about the Daniel Sachs Award. Brian, it's been an amazing summer of sport, hasn't it?
It has been, and it's confounded all expectations because there was a very English sense of it's not going to work, it's going to go wrong, and it has confounded all those expectations, and all the naysayers seem after the event to say it was a tremendous success. And I've personally enjoyed it, and everyone that I know of who's been involved has also enjoyed it.
And what do you think the Jewish perspective of the Olympics is? What can the Jewish community learn from the success of the Olympics, do you think, Brian?
Well, actually, the thing that stands out for me was Ali Reisman, the gymnast, and her pride in all her floor performances, not just at this Olympics, but at least for as long as she's been competing, it seems, has been proudly to the background music of Hava Nagila. And that Jewish pride and any absence of apology for being Jewish, I think is an inspiration. That's one of the things that stands out.
Yeah. Your role as athletic correspondent to the Jewish Chronicle must be very exciting, Brian.
I've been enjoying it. I've been doing it since 2007,
Wow.
Although in 2006 I did a main feature article. It was the main feature that week on the London Marathon and the Jewish contribution to it. But I've been the athletics correspondent since 2007, and I have enjoyed it a lot. Mainly, well, for two reasons, really. Here we turn a bit Monty Python. Yes. We'll make that three reasons. Number one, and in no particular order, I've always loved athletics. Number two, I took up this writing shortly after taking early retirement from computing, but I've always loved writing. That's not to say I'm a great writer, but it's something I've liked as a hobby. And thirdly, I've just really enjoyed getting to know the Jewish athletics community, which contains great journalists, great athletes, great trainers, and great youngsters. And I've really enjoyed getting to know them, and a little bit vicariously.
Do you have to, Brian, do you have to like the sport in order to be a journalist on that particular topic?
I would very much imagine so. I mean,
if the JC perhaps appointed you as football correspondent, how would you feel about that?
I would feel that they'd lost their mind, because really the reason that I'm into athletics, the other side of the coin is that I'm not into most other sports. The reason I was drawn to athletics was that I never had any talent at football or cricket or any other sport you could mention, including running. This prevailed right throughout primary school. But when I got to secondary school, I was lucky enough to be at a school where I quickly found out that there was another aspect to running, namely distance running, and I immediately took to it. And finally I'd found something that I could do moderately well. And the fact that I had no affinity for any other sports really channeled me into a love of athletics.
And also you've been very busy this summer organising the Spyro Arc Jews in Sport series as well, haven't you, Brian?
I have been actually, and that was another lovely thing to do, because the Spyro Arc is an institute that is run by Nietzsche and Robin Spyro, who've been involved in Jewish cultural education for many, many years. And I was lucky enough to study with them for a period of 2 or 3 years. And it seemed that I was the only person that Nietzsche knew that had any real involvement in sport. So she had this idea that because the Olympics were coming this year, it would be nice for the Spyro Arc to do something to commemorate the Olympics. And she asked me to help her organise it. And it was a lovely thing to do because it was really nice to give something back to Nietzsche and Robin for what they had given me.
And would you encourage perhaps aspiring Jewish journalists to perhaps take a role in sports journalism, Brian?
I can answer just by talking about my own experience. My own experience was that in 2006, specific circumstances arose where it occurred to me there's an article to be written about the London Marathon, and I was able to convince the feature editor of the Jewish Chronicle that this could be their main feature for the week. That was in 2006. Come a year later, and I was in early retirement at that stage, and I had the idea that I'd like to do a bit of writing. I wrote to Danny Caro, the sports editor of the Jewish Chronicle, suggesting that I write on athletics for them. I had some ideas that I put to him. So I had these specific ideas and the general idea that I write on athletics. So, I mean, if that's any guide as to how somebody else might approach their aspiration to write, then I hope it's useful.
Great. Brian, I understand also you've given some talks at the Jewish Museum in Manchester.
I gave one talk, and it's a talk that I'd given as part of the Spyro Arc series that you mentioned before, and I'd originally given it at Limud last year. It was a talk on the greats of Jewish athletics. The first time round at Limud, I called it No More an Oxymoron, because there's this idea that you can be a Jewish, you can be an athlete, you can be great, but you can't be all three. I enjoyed giving it. We do have some great Jewish athletes, and by athletes I mean track and field athletes, that are both great in their achievements and both great in terms of the interest value of their story.
And do you think, Brian, perhaps in the next decade there will be more Jewish sportsmen coming on the scene? Your prediction?
Well, as I say, I can only talk about track and field because that's the only sport that I really know about.
Yes.
And in terms of youngsters, there are some good youngsters coming along, and I try to foster that by the Daniel Sachs Award, which tries to give some publicity to young athletes. There is a great Jewish athlete called Richard Goodman, who's now on an athletic scholarship at Oregon University, who's of international standard. He, at the end of last year, December 2011, he got the silver medal in the European Cross Country Championships. So there are some good Jewish athletes coming along, but I'd encourage any youngster to try out at their school, at their local athletics club. They may well find talents that they never knew they possessed.
And Judaism and sports go hand in hand, I think, Brian. You know, the discipline, the enjoyment, and the focus, and the enrichment in one's life.
I agree with you, and I think we've both had the very pleasant experience of encountering that at the Jews in Sports series, because you were there to see Danielle Sanderson,
Absolutely
who
right,
epitomises all the virtues that you've just mentioned. She's proudly Jewish. She's an ultra-marathon runner.
Yes.
Her distances is anything from the marathon up to 100 kilometres, with tremendous focus, and she really enjoys it. And yes, Jewish focus, Jewish pride, Jewish
enrichment. Absolutely,
yes.
Brian, we're also here to speak about the Daniel Sachs Award. Can you tell Jewish Online magazine viewers about this award?
Yeah, my son Daniel died in late 2005. He was a keen athlete. For the previous 7 years, he had run the London Marathon, and he was very proud that in 2004 he finally achieved his ambition of running it in under 3 hours. He ran it in 2:51. In the course of those 7 years, he must have raised about £10,000, I would think, for British Emunah. He always was running it for British Emunah. He loved his athletics. After he died, I wanted to commemorate him and keep his memory alive.
Yes.
And because he loved his athletics, I wanted to do it through athletics as well. Now, in my role as a sports journalist, at one point the sports editor, Danny Caro, asked me to write a detailed study of the state of Jewish athletics in this country. And when I investigated, I found that it had been diminishing as an interest, and a lot of the problem was down right at the early stages in schools.
Yes.
And so I wanted to do something to encourage Jewish youngsters to get out running or throwing or jumping.
Yes.
And I brought it all together with this Daniel Sachs Award, where the idea was that for each year there would be an award, one for boys, one for girls, aged between 11 and 16. I wanted to keep the interest as wide as possible. I didn't want one person dominating year after year. So as part of the set of rules, it was that no athlete could win it more than once. There would be a different boys winner, different girls winner each year. But I realized also that despite that, there could only be one winner, and that an average runner could perhaps not aspire to win. So I wanted a medium whereby every athlete's performance would be recognized. So I have an award site. Its URL is danielsachsaward.org.uk, and on it I feature any and every young Jewish athlete. I have a page of photographs, and I maintain via a spreadsheet that I put on the web the performance of every athlete who is competing on a level that's recognised nationally, so at borough championships, at county championships, or in the various local and national leagues. I also wanted to encourage athletes to get out into the wider community, not just compete in, say, the Jewish League. I know that there's some kind of sports competition amongst the, I think, 5 main Jewish schools, but I wanted to encourage athletes to compete at borough level or to get out.
And how's the award going, Brian?
Well, it's now in its 3rd year, and it is generating a lot of interest.
That's nice.
And I know that everyone who's involved is very appreciative of the greater spotlight that's being put on athletics, both through this award and through it having a greater coverage in the Jewish press.
And your son Daniel how did he aspire to want to be a marathon runner? How did he get his love for marathon running, would you say, Brian?
I guess it's through myself. I'd run the marathon. By the time he'd run it for the first time.
What age was this again?
He ran it for the first time in 1999,
Right.
when he was 21. But actually, I ran my first marathon in 1990, my second in 1991, and in fact the two of us were both down there at the finish line in 1991 because he was running his first London mini marathon in 1991, and he ran the London mini marathon right throughout his school career from 1991 till I guess 1996. Then in 1996 he went up to university, and in his final year, 1999, he ran the London Marathon for the first time. So as a child he always ran with me, and he was a little bit in the same boat as me. He was a little bit in the boat that athletics was his main sporting ability at school.
Was that his main focus in life, do you think? Love of running?
Because
sometimes in order to be a long distance runner, Brian, your whole life, doesn't it, has to be focused, whether it's your social life, whether it's your eating habits, everything's got to be tuned in for your mission.
Well, the London Marathon, for the years that he ran it, was certainly a big part of the months of January to April.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Unlike me, he had a much greater interest in sport. He was very keen on football,
right?
Particularly his love of Tottenham Hotspurs. And he actually got me taking him to Tottenham Hotspur for about 7 years.
But it didn't rub off on you though, Brian?
Not really.
Your love of football or Spurs?
He also loved snooker and was quite a gifted snooker player. His maximum break was 47.
Right. So an all-round sportsman then?
He was, yes. Yes, he was.
So the Daniel Sachs Award, Brian, is out there obviously to keep Daniel's memory in focus, but also to aspire the Jewish athletes to aspire to greater goals.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm probably a prime example of somebody who had no sporting talent whatsoever until he fortuitously discovered there was this thing called distance running. And I think that may be a common situation, that people have talents that they don't know they had. And if
I think, Brian, that's a very, very inspiring statement, because I think just with perhaps with the Paralympics, just a few days ago, it terminated. So many people have aspired that you can do anything if you put your mind to it.
yes, that I'm told that again and again, and it's perhaps it's true to say that everybody has got talents that perhaps they didn't know they possessed.
Absolutely.
And it would be, I'd encourage anyone to try out new things and perhaps discover this talent.
Yes, lovely. Brian Sachs, it's been an absolute pleasure having this schmooze with you, and thank you ever so much for joining Jewish Online Magazine.